Kugisaki came to herself, but only partially, over 10 minutes later. What called her back were the bonds cinching her hands behind her back. That was when she finally realized how weird the whole sequence of events had been. She was sitting in a room that didn't look at all like it belonged to an entertainment agency, containing just one simple desk and a bookshelf, other than the chair that she was tied to. Seals with occult symbols covered every inch of the walls and even the floor. At a glance, she knew that someone involved with Jujutsu had prepared this space. "What's the big idea, you slimeball?" she exclaimed. "Oh, you're awake," Sarube replied. "Go easy on the insults, yeah?" He was sitting behind a desk cutting a cigar with a knife. He looked at Kugisaki, then flicked his gaze behind her and said, "I told you to be gentle, Koizumi. You were too rough. It jolted her back to herself." Sorry, Sarube," the man, Koizumi, apparently, who was standing behind her, said. "But she had a hammer. It scared me." Koizumi was a wall of muscle. He looked larger than Toto. His professional wrestler's build didn't at all match his timid demeanor. "Well, the rope is just a safety measure, and I have to say I'm surprised at how easily she woke up anyway," Sarube said. "Kugisaki, that's your name, right? You must have a strong sense of self. I'm surprised." "Huh?" Kugisaki responded. The veins in her temples bulged as she realized how not good her situation was. They had slung her over the back of the chair, arms draped over the backrest. And from the way that her sleeves felt, they had probably taken her hammer, nails, and all. "How do you know my name?" she demanded. "You told me yourself, but I doubt you remember," Sarube answered. He lowered his head, looking down at her across the desk. The glare from the setting sun was shining through the window and making his expression hard to see, but it looked like he was smirking. "Take it easy, Kugisaki. We don't plan on hurting you. We just want to talk." "Huh? Why would I believe—" "Just believe me, yeah?" Kugisaki wanted to shout at him then, but her anger disappeared just as soon as it formed. It felt easy to just believe what he said, as Sarube had suggested, and part of her longed to take it easy. The rational part of her realized just how weird this was, but she found that she couldn't doubt him. No matter how much she wanted to put up her mental defenses, she had fallen into a state that was incomprehensible even to herself. Still, she could summon at least a measure of fighting spirit. "Stop smirking," she said. Kugisaki realized they hadn't tied her legs, so she shot to her feet. The rope tying her to the chair tightened painfully. She twisted her body and swung the legs of the chair at Sarube. "Not gonna happen," Koizumi said. She had made solid contact, but the only result was the chair broke. The big man had stepped between her and Sarube. She had swung with all her might, but he showed no signs of having suffered the slightest injury. "Tch," Kugisaki huffed. Kugisaki was a much smaller person than Koizumi, so she was the one who ended up on the floor. She immediately tried to stand up, but the chair interfered and she remained on her side, floundering. "Don't bother, Kugisaki. When it comes to sheer brute force, Koizumi's first rate. He's a total doofus about complicated curse techniques, but his physical strength, plus a curse technique for reinforcing skin with cursed energy, turn him into the ultimate shield." "Then I'll bust your head first," Kugisaki threatened. "Oh, I'm so scared," Sarube replied, but I wouldn't count on it. Those words alone were enough to wither Kugisaki's desire to resist. Although her eyes still simmered with spite, she could no longer entertain thoughts of defeating her captors. Chuckling, Sarube waved his finger and said, "Listen, my curse technique is curse speech." "Curse speech?" Kugisaki repeated. She thought of Inumaki. Even she knew that curse speech was dangerous. If she had to defend herself against the 1-2 punch of Koizumi's immense strength and Sarube's curse speech, the situation was dire indeed. "Yes," Sarube answered, "but my people ain't like the vaunted Inumaki family. We ain't as strong or versatile. Even with an amplifier, we barely compare, so don't worry." "Amplifier?" Kugisaki asked. "I gave you my card, right? It's made of an ancient tree called the Sarube Oroshi. It's connected to the cursed seal on my tongue. Likewise, the wallpaper covering every bit of this room consists of seals made from a single tree. It all functions as my tongue. I put a ton of effort into this construction. It's a barrier almost exactly like a domain. As for my cursed speech..." That was when Kugisaki, whose thoughts had been all fuzzy, realized that the danger was mounting. Because Sarube was disclosing his curse technique. Even worse, he was disclosing his curse technique as a cursed speech user. Kugisaki's warrior instincts were on high alert. She knew she shouldn't listen, but she couldn't move her hands to plug her ears. As Kugisaki's alarm increased, Sarube uttered the key words. "My cursed speech is inconvenient but simple. You simply have to believe what I say." Now Kugisaki realized the situation was about as bad as it could be. Sarube's cursed speech merely gave words credibility. However, combining that with the disclosure of his curse technique had a synergistic effect. The binding vow required him to reveal his ability as interlocked with his cursed speech, thereby compelling belief, and that was powerful. Kugisaki was compelled to believe even his explanation of her compulsion to believe. What's more, the seals that covered the room amplified the effect. Layer upon layer put her at a disadvantage. How much had he made her believe before she woke up? What suggestions had he given her? She had no way of knowing. "Don't worry," Sarube said. "You just gotta listen like a good girl. You do that and I won't hurt you." "And yet you've tied me up," she said. "Seriously, you gotta believe me," Sarube went on. "And you do, right? You already believe me." Sarube's cursed speech compelled her to believe him when he stated that she believed him. She felt like she was going crazy. "Just chill," he said. "I ain't gonna take your life, but I want you to tell me something about Jujutsu High, where you go to school." "How do you know I'm a high school student?" she asked. "Well, guys like me have a network," he responded. "So I know that 3 new first years just enrolled, and that there's a loser grade 3 noob, and what they all look like. We know that much. I buy the info, then get more details about Jujutsu High from small-time rookie sorcerers. It's my business." "Oh." Kugisaki wondered if Sarube and his network had connections to curse users involved with special grade curse spirits, but decided that was unlikely. A group like that would be able to infiltrate Jujutsu High, so there would be no need to resort to such circuitous ways of gathering information. Even so, she wanted to avoid telling them anything about the school. Its layout, the nature of the barrier that protected it, information about staff. Jujutsu High was the locus of the sorcerer's activities, a place for developing combat strength. She didn't want to reveal even the slightest piece of information to anyone who was so clearly opposed to Jujutsu High. Before Sarube's cursed speech completely demolished her judgment, and she told them whatever they asked, she needed to enact a countermeasure. At the very least, she needed to take action while she was still capable of formulating such thoughts. She considered that biting through her own tongue might eventually be necessary. Or maybe I need to do it now, before I lose all sense of myself and forget who Nobara Kugisaki is, she thought. Just as she was solidifying her resolve, a loud sound came from outside the room. "Huh?" Sarube grunted. The sound distracted Kugisaki's opponents, presenting her with a momentary opportunity, but she couldn't even stand up. All she could do was grind her teeth. Sarube thought for a moment, then issued an order to Koizumi. "Was that a mouse? Go take a look," he directed. "This girl won't cause us any trouble for a while. You can handle bullets and stuff, though, so it's safer for you." "Sure," Koizumi agreed, creeping toward the door. He was so big that he'd have to stoop to fit through it. He turned the doorknob, bent double, and stuck out his head. "Sleep," a voice said. "What?" It was the last thing Koizumi said before his massive form collapsed like a tranquilized bear, or a marionette whose strings had been cut. He sprawled by the door, now looking like a giant doorstop. Before Kugisaki could grasp what was happening, a figure jumped into the room and launched towards Sarube. Sarube blocked a hand chop that flew at his face, but not the fist that jabbed his solar plexus an instant later. A dull sound rang out. "Gah!" Sarube cried out, his body folded and collapsed. Kugisaki couldn't clearly see what was happening because of her position on the floor and the glare of the setting sun, but she realized right away who had forced his way in. "Inumaki-senpai?" she asked. "Salmon," he replied. Then he closed his collar, hiding his mouth's curse seal, and turned to face her. "Kelp." "That's not very reassuring," she said. "Salmon roe." "Just kidding. Thanks." Salmon. Inumaki used the knife Sarube had been using to cut his cigar to cut Kugisaki's ropes. Her skin hurt where the rope had chafed, but she was able to struggle to her feet. She considered asking Inumaki why he had come, but of course he wouldn't be able to explain, so she decided to use her own head. She figured the reason was pretty simple. Inumaki was a semi-grade 1 sorcerer on a solo mission. When he had encountered Kugisaki walking around alone in the city, he had tried to warn her about something. Shortly thereafter, she had fallen into the enemy's hands. Inumaki had been targeting Sarube the whole time. Kugisaki couldn't help but wish that she had simply listened to Inumaki's warning. But how was she supposed to understand when the only words he said were rice ball ingredients? Well, she could at least try to remember that fish flakes and mustard leaf didn't have very bright connotations. "We gotta escape," she said, "but we should tie up those sham recruiters first." "Salmon," Inumaki said. "I guess salmon sort of expresses agreement," she guessed. "Salmon," he responded. "That's so simple, yet so hard. Watch out!" "Salted fish roe?" he asked. A large figure appeared behind him. Koizumi had woken up from Inumaki's cursed speech and risen from the floor. Inumaki immediately tried to free his mouth, but Koizumi's fist was already coming down. Get out of the way, Kugisaki shouted. She shot forward like a bullet, thrusting her senpai aside and heading straight for Koizumi. The Goliath was already on the move, but Kugisaki was faster. Without her hammer, she couldn't use her straw doll technique, but that didn't mean she couldn't fight. In fact, she was all too accustomed to fighting larger opponents. Silently thanking Panda, Kugisaki threw her full weight into an elbow jab to Koizumi's solar plexus. It worked. Maybe a little too well. Huh? Kugisaki was surprised at how easily Koizumi went down. His stomach muscles hadn't even tensed. He just fell as if he had no intention of defending himself. Kugisaki's puzzlement quickly turned to alarm. At the sound of violent coughing, Kugisaki turned to see Tsurube. He was on his feet and glaring at her as he stepped on Inumaki, who had fallen and was clutching his throat. "Inumaki-senpai?" Kugisaki exclaimed. "Damn brats want to go causing trouble, eh?" Tsurube shouted. His face no longer wore the smirk it had moments ago. His bulging eyes were full of malice. His tongue, forked like a snake's, peeked from his mouth, which bore the patterns of a cursed seal. "Koizumi is a decoy," he explained. "I gave him a command so that even if he loses consciousness, he wakes up a given period of time later. That's how I was able to take down this meddler. I always have a backup plan." "What did you do to Inumaki?" Kugisaki demanded. "The Inumaki family is well known, and I was able to ascertain that one of their cursed speech users is at Jujutsu High," Tsurube answered. "So of course I took precautions." Tsurube picked up a wet cloth that had fallen to the floor and flourished it. "It's kind of a homemade tear gas, like mace. Cursed speech users always have ways of defending against each other's cursed speech, especially strong cursed speech user. Uttering just one word puts pressure on the throat. It's instantaneous." "Huh?" Kugisaki said. "Inumaki wouldn't fall for that so easily." "I owe it to you, Kugisaki," Tsurube said. "He's your senpai, so when he saw an unknown object flying at you, he didn't hesitate to leap to your defense. He's such a caring guy." Something inside Kugisaki snapped. Anger over her own carelessness made her blood boil, driving away all thought. She had just doubled the amount of trouble that she had caused Inumaki. Why did he go out on an investigation alone? It was because of compatibility with his target. For targeting a cursed speech user, another cursed speech user like Inumaki would have the most suitable knowledge. Alone, he would have been able to handle this easily, because the enemy was hardly formidable. But Tsurube and Koizumi had gotten the best of her twice, thereby exposing Inumaki to danger when he came to rescue her. She was filled with a single emotion, which cleared away all extraneous thought and distraction. That emotion was anger, pure anger. Not at her opponents, but at herself. The sunset stained the room blood red, as the desk, walls, and floor turned crimson. What seemed most vivid to Kugisaki was the target she needed to hit. Her agitation hadn't disrupted her reason. Instead, sheer fury had sharpened her resolve. "Careful now," Tsurube warned. "You shouldn't raise your hand to me, Kugisaki. I already got you to tell me your curse technique, straw doll, right? I have your hammer, so you can't use it. So just stop, yeah? You shouldn't even consider trying to harm—" "Shut up," Kugisaki said. "Huh?" Tsurube looked astonished at having been interrupted. His cursed speech should have been binding her spirit. She shouldn't have been able to find the will to interrupt his words. He didn't think that she had the mental fortitude to resist his amplified cursed speech, especially since she was weak. An inexperienced brat, a grade 3 sorcerer. But he didn't know. He didn't know that the girl before his eyes wasn't weak. More than an inexperienced brat or a grade 3 sorcerer. She was Nobara Kugisaki. "I'd rather listen to someone vomiting," Kugisaki said. She took Tsurube's business card from her pocket. She had just seen the effects of cursed speech firsthand. So now she realized the danger of this power that could cause harm with a mere word. Inumaki's sacrifice, abandoning using normal speech so that he could seal away this danger, was immense. Why had he risked himself to protect Kugisaki from Tsurube's knockout drug? Because he wasn't able to warn her. His mouth formed the words that became reality. So he couldn't say danger. And because of that, he hadn't hesitated to be her shield. Inumaki spoke words and abandoned words for the benefit of others. Tsurube's glib jabbering was worthless compared to Inumaki's sparse utterances. Kugisaki tossed Tsurube's card to the floor and raised one leg. I wouldn't bother," Tsurube scoffed. When he remembered her curse technique, straw doll involves remotely infusing a doll with cursed energy. But he had taken away her hammer and doll, so there should be no way for her to use this technique. Should there? She was acting out of mere desperation. She had to be. a small form dropped from Kugisaki's hand onto the business card. It was a doll made of the rope that they had used to bind Kugisaki's hands. She had fashioned a rudimentary doll from the rope's frayed ends. Any sorcerer whose curse technique required a medium would understand the great danger of losing that medium. It would only make sense that a sorcerer would acquire the skill of creating a medium from whatever was close at hand. Kugisaki had her doll, and as for the nail to charge with cursed energy, Tsurube's eyes then focused on the pin heels of the boots that she was wearing. Hey, no, don't, he said. He was unable to think of anything to say that would be an effective counter before she brought down her boot. Don't or stop alone wouldn't carry sufficient meaning. Tsurube's cursed speech couldn't force behavior, it could only instill belief. It wouldn't work if the words weren't substantial enough. Even now, however, he wasn't worried. Kugisaki only intended to use Straw Doll for an attack via the business card, which was made from the same tree as the cursed seals around the room. And that was too broad a target. The damage from a cursed energy blast coming from a mere grade 3 sorcerer would be diffused to almost nothing among the countless seals. There's no problem, Tsurube assured himself. However, the only thing he'd gotten out of Kugisaki while she was brainwashed was the nature of her curse technique. He had no reason to suspect she was anything but some grade 3 sorcerer, a loser noob. But Kugisaki wasn't someone who could so easily be reduced to simple categories. "It's useless, you damn brat," he shouted. "Struggle all you want, but I told you to shut up," she interrupted him. With one stomp of her boot, she pierced the doll and the business card. Her honed cursed energy rushed out, and all the seals went up in flames. So did Tsurube's tongue, which was linked to the seals. Tsurube writhed in excruciating pain as his tongue split like a blooming flower. Kugisaki looked down at him, then opened the desk drawer in a leisurely way and removed her hammer, nails, and straw doll. Tsurube screamed again. He was staggering toward the door, looking as if he might collapse at any moment. As intense as the pain assailing him was, he could still sense the danger to his life, and he knew he had to escape. He seemed a sorry sight, but Kugisaki couldn't allow him to leave. She didn't know how much information she had revealed while under the influence of his cursed speech, and thought it was probably best to put an end to him right now. She tossed a nail into the air and swung her hammer, but a split second before she struck it, she heard a hoarse command. "Don't kill him," Inumaki stammered. Tsurube screamed. The distraction had caused Kugisaki to divert the nail to Tsurube's ankle, which prevented him from moving. If he couldn't flee, that was enough. Kugisaki checked to make sure that he was immobile, then dropped her gaze to Inumaki, who was still on the floor, clutching his throat. "Fish flakes," he said. "Aw, come on," she replied. Inumaki was back to naming only rice ball ingredients, but Kugisaki understood what had transpired. He hadn't forced those words of normal speech through his damaged throat out of concern for Tsurube. He had done it so that she wouldn't have to bear the weight of having taken a life, even though their job as sorcerers entailed a lot of death. "You guys are too nice for sorcerers." She thought of her comrade's considerate words immediately after a fight. Kugisaki understood how extraordinarily kind Inumaki's words were, because she had previously experienced such kindness. All right, y'all. That is Section 4, Chapter 1 of Nobara's novel. Gosh, it's been a long time, hasn't it? I am so sorry for the hiatus. Couple of cool things I want to talk about generally in this chapter before I go ahead and start naming all the reasons Nobara's coming back. One of the interesting things, or one of the little, imagery things that I did in my head during this, I turned Koizumi into LaRue. In my head, that's who I picture when I'm thinking about Koizumi. Another cool thing, Cursed Speech Part 2? What is this? This reminds me of when Kenjaku was talking about, words infused with spirit or whatever he was talking about. And part of me wonders if you make a binding vow with cursed speech involved, what kind of extra amplification do you get on that binding vow? Okay, say for example, a couple hires a cursed speech user to marry them, right? Are they ever going to get a divorce? You know what I mean? That type of a deal. Does the Inumaki family and binding vows have anything in common? Anyway, I'm going to move on to the Nobara stuff now before I start talking in headcanons. Okay. All right. Okay. Sorry. I had to look at my notes. This is the one and only thing I want to talk about. All right. Tsurube flat out says that this room functions as a domain. You can rewind the video and re-listen to me say the thing if you want. But he flat out says that between the talismans on the wall and the floor, the amplifier in her pocket in the form of the business card, and his cursed seal, his tongue, his cursed speech thing, all of that effectively makes that room his domain. Now, prior to Nobara even getting disappointed in herself and getting the little power up in that moment, we have Nobara flat out resisting this room and the domain. Like Tsurube says it himself, you must have a strong sense of self, Nobara Kugisaki. Like, nobody can really resist this. How did you wake up so fast? Now, it's not only that she resisted him, but she attacked him in his own domain. She attacked the domain. She attacked the cursed speech user via the domain. Now, what does that mean for Nobara Kugisaki? It means that, actually, I'm just going to throw this in the heaping pile of evidence I have for why Gege took her off the board so soon. This heaping pile of evidence has one thing in common, and it's all resonance is kind of a hack. And, like, this instance literally shows it perfectly. If you can attack somebody through their curse technique, which she does with SO and Ketchizu too, I mean, then you prevent Sumiki, you prevent whatever else Kenjaku activated. I mean, you prevent Kenjaku, you can probably separate some souls. You can probably handle Yuji in his situation pretty quickly. It's like literally she had to be taken off of the board when she was taken off of the board. So any day now, I feel like the board is ready for her return. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Sorry for the delay on this section. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a long one. What are we running on? 20 minutes right now? That is crazy. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.